too high. Let me
Well, this is CIMECODES Media, and yeah, don't blame the messenger. Yeah.
Yo, you don't know, this is Trilogy, straight out of Dominica, and you're tuned in to CIMECODES Media. Don't blame the messenger. Boom!
Yo, it's your boy CIMECODES in the building once again, my people, brothers and sisters, friends. So yeah, let me say, respect to everyone locked in tonight. We're having a real conversation. No noise, no fear. I'm joined by a gentleman out of Trinidad and Tobago, but the island of Tobago in the Twin Islands of Trinidad and Tobago. We are talking about Caribbean unity, what CARICOM really is doing, and the Venezuela situation from a Trinidad and Tobago perspective. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have the gentleman called Mr. Leroy George. I would really like you, sir, to introduce yourself to my audience so that they know who you are as an individual.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Leroy George. I am the founder of Full 100 Democracy. Full 100 Democracy is a talk group where we discuss things pertaining to democracy. At first, it was made specifically to celebrate the 100th year of democracy in Trinidad and Tobago as practiced through general elections. But now we have members from all over the world, ranging from as far east as South Korea and Nepal to as far west as Ecuador, and the bulk of our members are in the Eastern Caribbean. And so as that expansion has happened, we have also expanded the conversation to everything that pertains to democracy within the entire world. Also, besides that, I was the research officer in the Office of the Minority Leader. As you know, Tobago is part of the larger nation of Trinidad and Tobago. And so the Minority Leader in the Tobago House of Assembly is the equivalent of the opposition leader. That was back in between 2019 to 2021. And I'm also a research writer. I write articles that are oftentimes published in the largest periodical in Trinidad and Tobago, the largest and longest running one, I believe it is, which is the Guardian newspaper.
Okay. So you come in with some accolades behind your name then, sir?
Yes.
So let me ask you this though. Why Caribbean unity? Why is it important to you on a personal level?
Well, as a Tobagonian, Caribbean unity means a lot more to us possibly than to Trinidadians, because historically, being a small island, we're 20 times smaller than Trinidad, both in geographical size and also in population. We are oftentimes neglected. We have 2 of the 41 seats in Parliament, and so it is easy to neglect us. However, between the years 1958 and 1962, when the entire Caribbean was one united group of islands, right, the English-speaking Caribbean, and we were intended to become an independent nation on the exact day that Trinidad and Tobago became independent. During that time, we saw a situation where the people of Trinidad, or the legislative council members of Trinidad, would not have ignored Tobago in the way that they are accustomed to doing. And so we were treated better so that the rest of the Eastern Caribbean especially would see that Trinidad would make for a better big brother or big sister member in the Federation of the West Indies than Jamaica, because those two bigger islands were competing for dominance within this brotherhood, sisterhood, fraternal situation. And so we, the people of Tobago, remember that. We also remember the fact that previous to 1889, when we joined with Trinidad as a crown colony organization, we were more oftentimes grouped with nations like your own, Dominica, St. Vincent, Grenada, and Barbados. And so understanding where we come from, we understand that we have options going forward. We see a situation right now, which is very unfortunate, where the Prime Minister, whose legacy is one, does not predate the history of Trinidad and Tobago. Let me be more frank and say exactly what I mean when I say that. She's of East Indian descent, and East Indians have been in Trinidad and Tobago in large numbers only after 1838, when slavery would have come to a conclusion.
Yeah.
And so some of the lessons that were learned throughout the times of slavery, etc., and even before that, may not have followed her. Her lineage would have come from India much sooner than our lineage comes from Africa. And so the value of that unity is it appears to be lost on her, and we know there possibly some personal agenda where that is concerned, but the ridiculousness of her stance that we're seeing right now is one that definitely would be, would definitely be one that is influenced by that cultural difference, etc. And so I think a good friend of mine, Miguel, he would not forgive me if I did not say that I think I speak for the vast majority of Tobagonians, including himself, when I say, if Trinidad leaves CARICOM, Tobago leaves Trinidad.
Okay. Well, let's hold up on that notion there real quick. Let's hold up on that notion there real quick. Let me ask you this then: Caribbean unity, CARICOM.
Yeah.
Oh, first, before I ask you that, what's the population of Tobago?
60,000. It's the last time we had a census, it was in 2011, and it was 60,000 roughly. And so a lot of persons assume that we're probably closer to 70,000. What I could tell you, the last time I looked at because I used to be the elections officer in the political party that won the last THA elections, the Tobago House of Assembly elections, so I had to pay attention to these things. The last voter count was 51,600 and something, if memory serves me correct, the last time I checked back in 2020. And so I would imagine that would just be persons that are between the age of 18 and whatever age you die at, adults, right? Yeah. So you add on some persons that we're looking at a figure closer to 70,000, I would imagine by now, in contrast to that 60,000 that was originally the figure. Okay.
So Tobago has a large population, even almost more population than Dominica.
Yes, definitely. But Trinidad, of course, is bigger than Tobago, 20 times bigger. Trinidad has almost 1.4 million persons.
People. All right. I have a video I want to play real quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want you to listen to this video, and then we're going to follow up with a few questions after that. Let's listen to this real quick.
Trinidad, which is just a few kilometers from Venezuela. So Trinidad and Tobago has become the main staging point for the assault on Venezuela. And this has a larger meaning. The U.S. has, for a generation or several generations, sought to prevent the regional integration of the Caribbean nations, to keep them weak and fragmented, because integration would mean they become a powerful bloc with enormous human potential and resources. Kept separate, they're just a bunch of islands that with hardly any ability to travel between one another. To Venezuela.
So no, based on what you just heard, right? I want to read the question properly, yeah? Based on what you just heard, when people say Caribbean unity, what does that really mean?
Well, what I believe he's specifically speaking on about, and it's not the first time I saw that video. I saw the entire interview previously, like about 2 weeks ago or something like that. But what he appears to be talking about is the breakup of the Federation of the West Indies, which happened as a result of, in 1958, there was an election. And in that election, the election was to decide who would form the first government of what would go on to become the independent Federation of the West Indies, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes when you watch the West Indies cricket matches, they even use the same Federation of the West Indies flag. Anyway,
Yeah.
and that election, there were two political partnerships, for want of, or groupings. One was a group of political parties that would consider themselves to be democratic capitalists, and one was a group of political parties that, as a grouping, would consider themselves to be democratic socialists. And of course, 1958, this is around the peak of the Cold War era. And so when the democratic socialists won that election, efforts were made to make sure that the Caribbean was broken up. And what is most important, especially for this conversation between a Tobagonian and some Dominicans to take note of, I think one of the things that amazed the Americans and the British as it pertains to the results of that election is that all of Jamaica, well, Jamaica as an island, voted for the Democratic Capitalist Organization or group of parties, and the Trinidad also voted for the Democratic Capitalists. I think of all the smaller islands, it was only Antigua that voted for the Democratic Capitalists. So the winning of the Democratic Socialist groupings, which included the People's National Movement, the Red Party here in Trinidad and Tobago, would have happened on the strength of the smaller islands. And I don't think that they expected the smaller islands like Dominica and Tobago voted for the Democratic Socialist Organization. Our representative was a man who went on to become a legend, Mr. A.N.R. Robinson, who our airport is named after, the person who's the ICC, the International Criminal Court, that's his brainchild, etc., was both president and prime minister at different times in Trinidad and Tobago. So we would have been able to work together to take the entire Caribbean down a different path that perhaps the imperialists would not perhaps, I'm being overly diplomatic there, the imperialists would not have been happy about. And so they would have offered Jamaica the opportunity to become independent on their own. Once they pull out of the Federation, they had a referendum, and the results of that referendum was 55% of Jamaicans agreed with Alexander Bustamante that Jamaica should pull out of the Federation. They would have had their reasons, because a lot of the benefits of being in a federation went to Trinidad in contrast to Jamaica, because of course the majority of the English-speaking Caribbean is in the Southern Caribbean, not in the Northern Caribbean. And then afterwards you would have had Dr. Eric Williams making a most unfortunate statement. And that statement is 1 from 10 equals to 0. And then Trinidad and Tobago pulls out, and Barbados held on for a while, but I believe Barbados would have pulled out. And now you have the Eastern Caribbean, which use the EC currency, etc., and maintain some unity, being the remnant of the Federation of the West Indies. But CARICOM is also part of the remnants of the Federation of the West Indies, and it is what we expect to use to rebuild our unity as is necessary in this given period, where due to our weaknesses as independent little nations, we are being taken advantage of, especially here in Trinidad and Tobago, by the United States and other imperial nations for ignoble reasons.
So, another question I want to ask you. What is CARICOM getting wrong right now?
That is a very good question. What is CARICOM getting wrong right now? There is the Yellow is the Code campaign led by Kamla Persad-Bissessar, right? Which part, if you look at the political parties across the entire English-speaking Caribbean, you'll notice that they all fall into one out of two groupings. One of the groupings is either they wear blue or they wear yellow. And the blue and the yellow are actually synonymous to each other. So here in Tobago, we have a blue party called the TPP, which has been funded for many years by Kamla Persad-Bissessar, and we know this because we heard it from our own mouth and also the mouth of the political leader of the blue party, while Kamla leads the yellow party. And we've seen in recent elections that Kamla Persad-Bissessar, the yellow party, the leader of the yellow party, the UNC, has been interfering in the elections of all the English-speaking Caribbean nations while questioning the importance of CARICOM, etc. and we're seeing that we're losing ground. Those who would support. Now, I don't particularly support the Red Party because they tend to not be that good where domestic affairs is concerned, but I will be voting for them in this upcoming THA election. But where the Labour parties, the socialist type parties are concerned, we see that they've been losing ground as of late. They lost in St. Vincent, they lost in Guyana, and the only place I know still have won in recent times, they lost in Trinidad and Tobago, is in St. Lucia. And so, but I am hearing some good things coming out of the St. Vincent Prime Minister, Mr. Friday's mouth, that would indicate that perhaps I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're yellow, blue, red, as the case may be, the individuals that form the party could direct the direction in which it's going. And I'm somewhat optimistic about what is going on in St. Vincent based on what I've heard from the Prime Minister so far. But I think generally speaking, the decision, the trend that we're seeing to go capitalist in contrast to socialist is one that is being influenced by Trinidad and Tobago's Kamala Persad-Bissessar, but also more so by Donald Trump and his administration. And that is going to play a negative role because right now, the United States is in a mood or a mode of taking, not giving. And I think it's very important for Caribbean islands to understand that.
Look, I just seen a comment there come in saying that they just bombed Venezuela, we at war. Is that can you clarify that as you live so close by, or is that?
Yeah, I just came from Venezuela about 2 weeks ago also myself, and I also heard that news about them bombing.
Bombing? Okay.
Yeah. And I also heard that report about them bombing Venezuela. And I think what happened there is that Donald Trump would have made a comment that seemed to insinuate either intention or maybe a intentional mischief of stating some intent to bomb a particular site in Venezuela. But from what I'm hearing from the most reliable sources that I heard from, all of this happening within a couple hours or so, it seems as though it did not actually happen. There was, however, a situation where one of the major refineries in Venezuela went up into flames relatively recently, and I'm wondering if when Donald Trump talk about bombing Venezuela, he's talking about sabotage where that particular refinery is concerned. But to say that something today or yesterday happened, it doesn't appear as though that happened unless it's a very isolated situation in some rural area that nobody has taken any notice of.
Well, he's saying the individual is saying it just happened here now. So let me
like now?
Yeah.
In this moment?
Yes.
Oh, but that would make sense. That would make sense because Donald Trump did insinuate some intent to do something like that.
Let me see. 3 hours ago, Trump says U.S. strike big facility in its Venezuelan focused anti-drug campaign. That happened 3 hours ago. So did Trump just bomb Venezuela or what? I'm just pulling this up right off of Google right now, so I'm not 100% sure how accurate it is. So over a long Christmas break, the President of the United States may have leaked classified information about a secret military operation targeting Venezuela, and did so while calling into a New York radio show hosted by Marty Supreme. So that's of what I'm getting right now. So I haven't seen it really happening as of yet, but we never know. We never know. Anything is possible right now.
It was less than 2 hours ago that I would have heard that the claim of the United States recently bombing Venezuela was not accurate. So okay. I would lean towards it not having not happened
as of yet,
but probably a probing exercise by Donald Trump to see how the world would respond if such a thing was to happen.
All right, understood.
That would be my guess, my educated guess.
Okay. So I have a next question here for you. If there's one thing in CARICOM you could fix, what would it be?
Travel. As that the clip that you pointed out. When I first saw it, I said travel. Why is travel so important? And I realized that I think you and I had a conversation before even this show where we talked about what a question you had asked and I also had asked on our different platforms. What has the United States really done for Trinidad and Tobago? And
or for the Caribbean in general.
Or for the Caribbean in general. And clearly the answer to that is nothing of any great significance. And that is particularly important to take note of, considering that Venezuela had provided Trinidad and Tobago with a serious lifeline for our dying and petrochemical industry. But that is something else to talk about. And I realized that the day when Trinidad and Tobago's former Prime Minister and his executive council would have announced that we were going forward with the drug and gas deal, which was of immense importance to Trinidad and Tobago's economy. It's a situation which part where, because Venezuela is being sanctioned, we were going to run a pipeline from Venezuelan platforms to Trinidad and Tobago and sell their gas, their natural gas. And in so doing, we would split the profits and Venezuela would benefit and we would benefit also. But initially, we wanted the pipeline to run to a platform that is owned by a U.S. company. That way, the United States kind of into it,
yeah.
And we don't run into any problems with the United States. And when the United States said they were not going to give that platform a license to conduct this particular exercise, the then administration, which went out of power in August, gone, they said we're still going forward with it. And the very next day, the British or England or Great Britain would have announced that to get to England from now on, Trinidad and Tobago citizens need visas. And we've seen over and over throughout the Caribbean, I think Dominica included, the only thing that they have been using as a horsewhip to get us to do what they want is reducing access to visit their nation. And this is why it is important for us to have easy access to each other's islands, each other's nations here in CARICOM. Because think about it. If I, as a Trinbagonian, could easily come to Dominica, a Jamaican could easily come to Trinidad, work, function, everything, St. Lucia, all of that, this desire to want to run to the United States as soon as you discover that your particular little island on this world may not have everything that is necessary for the fulfillment of your dreams. We would just look to each other and we become united and we become strong, because it is not the norm, it is the exception and not the norm that such high percentages of our nations are trying to run to the United States. You might like the United States, you might want to go there to visit once in a lifetime, if so much. But this thing where the United States is seen as an escape route is something that isn't necessary and is the only thing that keeps us in the grip of the imperialist organization, which is the United States.
And earlier today, because I posted something on Facebook earlier today, and I was reading some of the comments, and somebody was making a statement that we didn't used to go to Venezuela. When Caribbean people go into Venezuela. And I'm like, in the 1940s and 1950s, right after the Second World War, our Caribbean people migrated over to Venezuela and to Panama. They also worked on the oil rigs. They worked on the Panama Canal. And you also made that statement too in a video I saw, where you made the fact that there's an entire village in Venezuela.
Not a village, a city.
A city. Okay, good.
El Calao.
So could you expound a little bit on that?
So in the 1870s, not long after the end of slavery, a lot of people from the Southern Caribbean, they refer to it as the Antilles in Venezuela. They still refer to it in El Calao. They would have gone to Venezuela. Venezuela was the place to run to when you want to follow your dreams. And they would have engaged in gold mining, coal mining, all kind of mining. And they would have brought to El Calao Calypso and Carnival. And so to this day, every January, they celebrate Calypso and Carnival, and the Calypso songs very similar to ours here in the Southern Caribbean, etc. They've maintained the whole culture very, very, very well. As a matter of fact, I don't know if Dominica has it, but I know Grenada have it in a big way. Sometimes they put on the black oil on your skin and you dress up like a devil and you're going around the place. right? And in Trinidad and Tobago, they say, give me money, jab, jab, give me money, jab, jab. And if you don't have no money to give them a little donation, they rub up the black oil on you. They do that in Venezuela, except is a kind of coal. It's something from that coal, that black coal that they rub on the skin and they rub it on you if you don't give them a donation. Long story short, our historical connections to Venezuela could be argued as being greater than our historical connections to the United States. It's just a matter of when it happened. You happen to talk about one of the latest waves in the 1940s, but also you had other waves previous to that. And it's something important to remember, because now you have a situation where Venezuelans around 2020 would have started fleeing to Trinidad and Tobago. And when I tell them, when I go to Venezuela and I come back and I tell them, Venezuela is really nice. Caracas is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to. It's amazing. They're like, oh, well, if they're rich, why are they running here? And I always give them the same answer. I say the same reason we in Trinidad and Tobago started running to the United States in the late 1980s and early 1990s. They had a situation which the oil boom had come to an end. Opportunities, you had a want and you had opportunities. It was easier to travel to the United States, so we did the same thing. And now the Venezuelans, they went to a very short period of fleeing to Trinidad and Tobago and surrounding nations, and we tried to use it as some kind of stick upon which to ill-treat Venezuelans and to say that they like they are classed beneath us or something like that. And it's ridiculous, because they wouldn't tolerate that when they go to the United States or anywhere else in the world.
Let me ask this now. Should CARICOM pick a side in this war with Venezuela and the US? Everything is your opinion. I want people to know. And before you even answer that, I want you to introduce yourself again to the people who just tuned in, so that they can know who you are before we continue.
Leroy George is my name, and I'm the founder of Full 100 Democracy. We discuss matters pertaining to democracy across the entire globe. I'm also a former research officer in the Office of the Minority Leader. That would be the equivalent of like an opposition leader here in the Tobago space. Former elections officer, the last political party that won a Tobago House of Assembly election. The next Tobago House of Assembly election being due in just about 14 days or so. Also the public relations officer for Trinidad and Tobago Writers Guild, a director on the Tobago United Cooperative Board. So I'm getting involved more in banking, etc. So that's who I am. To answer your question, first thing first, it is the short answer. Let me start with the short answer. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
So the shorter answer is we should side with Venezuela. CARICOM.
Yes, that is my short answer. No, even though I give that short answer, I would also point out this, right? Not every alternative is a solution.
Okay.
Right here in Tobago, we had a situation very similar to what I understand happened in Dominica, which part we had an expansion of our airport, and China Railroad Construction was one of the major organizations that was involved in the building of that airport. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago did not sufficiently compensate those persons that would have lost their homes, their lands, their properties, etc. And there was one incident which part employees of China Railroad Construction was going into the homes of Afro-Tobagonians. Almost everybody in Tobago is black, and unlike Trinidad, of course, and taking out their properties and putting it on the side of the road. And then we had a situation with our chief secretary. He would have gone and met with China Railroad, and once he came out of there, he would have said that the Chinese people, they thought they were helping, when there was actually a whole protest outside of the house by us Tobagonians, a protest which I myself would have called for a couple hours before it actually happened.
Okay. And
so I say all of that to say, we do not take, because everything that's happening is really a proxy kind of war situation between China and the United States, with one nation having the largest purchasing power in the world and the next one having the GDP. So they're having a bit of a penis measuring competition taking place right now. And so
Okay.
everything that's happening outside of that is kind of like proxy wars and proxy situations. You don't take a approach of America is bad and we are siding with the global south led by China and just dive deeply into that until you now find yourself in a situation which part you're being exploited again, right? So we need to side with ourselves first.
Okay.
But in this particular situation, and by siding with ourselves first, I'm talking about us united as a single Caribbean, at least the English-speaking Caribbean, at least the Southern English-speaking Caribbean, at least if we can get that because Trinidad being problematic, at least the Eastern Caribbean, right? Including Tobago, please, right? Do not leave us with Kamla. That woman is malfunctioning. But anyway, I was bringing a whole heap of our petrochemicals into the equation too, because half of the marine territory of Trinidad and Tobago belongs to Tobago due to international laws. Anyway, so we side with ourselves first. But in this specific situation where you have Donald Trump, and I say Donald Trump in contrast to the United States, because 70% of the United States do not approve of what Donald Trump is doing with Venezuela, right? And the vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago, people think that we support Kamla Persad-Bissessar because she was recently elected into governance. But what people don't know is that she never, ever campaigned on this anti-Venezuelan, pro-Donald Trump situation. So when it comes to this Kamla and Donald Trump and Marco Rubio versus the people and the government of Venezuela situation, I say side with the people and the government of Venezuela for this reason, and this reason only. It is a very clear case of right and wrong. It is a very clear case of armed robbery and extortion. We have a situation which we have a radar here in Tobago, which most Tobagonians do not like having here in Tobago, that the Prime Minister stated would be used to, in her words, detect sanction busters. So let me just convert that into simpler language. To help the United States to make sure that those nations that want to do Venezuela cannot do
business with Venezuela. Okay.
Right? And so that is wrong. And as human beings, as individuals, we must always have the courage to side with what is right and side against what is wrong. Perhaps in the future, we'll have situations where Venezuela will be clearly in the wrong, and perhaps the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the President of the United States, or whoever, would clearly be in the right, and we need to be able, at the drop of a dime, to turn around and say, you know what, Venezuela, when you were right, we sided with you. When you're wrong, we're siding against you. And we need to be flexible and not try to recreate morality based on what we perceive to be connections, in national connections or international connections.
But some people saying that the war is because Maduro's government is illegitimate.
Right. As you would have noticed in my introduction to myself, most of everything that I say has to do with democracy and elections and stuff. Elections officer, I was candidate agent. I didn't mention that to a former minority leader who's like the opposition leader. Means you're legally, you're basically that person with signatures, etc. is concerned. Another title I didn't bring out was that I was, and the most important one for this particular segment of this conversation, I was an international observer in the last municipal elections in Venezuela in 2025, July 2025. And based on my observations, right? Now, remember the elections that they're talking about that makes him illegitimate in their opinion is July 2024. I would have observed July 2025 municipal elections to decide who is governor, who is mayor, stuff like that. And I could just give testimony of what I have observed and why I believe that more likely than not, Maduro is the democratically elected and appropriate president of Venezuela. And so what I'll begin with saying is that the voting process in Venezuela has checks and balances that I have not seen in Trinidad and Tobago. It could be argued as being greater than Trinidad and Tobago's checks and balances. And this does not come as a surprise, because when Joe Biden was the president of the United States, we know that Joe Biden would have agreed to ease up on some of the sanctions against Venezuela. And one of the things that demands on the part of the US side was that they need to have strong checks and balances to have a fair election. And so what I saw, I felt very confident was a fair election. Now, that being said, observing the polling or the voting is not the same as observing the counting, right?
Okay.
However, when we look at the results from that municipal election that I would have witnessed, there was a voter turnout of in the mid to late 40s, right, which is kind of low, but not morbidly low. And the opposition forces would have won about 2 out of about 20 districts or something like that, right? And it made sense. The numbers were making sense where that municipal election is concerned. And most importantly, we did not hear anybody anywhere claim that the results of that election was illegitimate, right? So understanding that this election happened 1 year before the election that Donald Trump and others are claiming is illegitimate, one is to ask, how is it the case that Maduro would have, they claim Maduro would have gotten something like 30% of the vote, right? How does the coalition of political parties that have Maduro as their leader, and it's very important to understand it's not one singular party, but a coalition of political parties, and that would be a deeper conversation because it ties into my belief that we're looking at a legitimate Venezuelan government, right? How is it that in 1 year period, they went from losing, having only 30% of the vote, according to Edmundo and the lady that won the Nobel Peace Prize and Donald Trump and whoever wants to see, right? How do they have such a low support base 1 year before and now come forward an election that is not being questioned or anybody saying is illegitimate? They just become all of a sudden popular. And then when you look at if you go on Wikipedia, right? Because it's difficult to find more reliable sources of information, especially since the Venezuelan Election Committee, I can't remember what the name is, etc. Everything would be in Spanish. But look at Wikipedia, you'd see 2 sets of numbers where the results are concerned, and you may notice something suspicious. One of the set of numbers would claim that Edmundo got, I think, 70% of the votes, and that Maduro got 30%. But when you look at the official numbers coming out of the Venezuelan election body, we have the Elections and Boundaries Commission, so the equivalent of that. You see that they're saying that Maduro would have gotten something in the vicinity, I think about 55%, somewhere in the mid to late 50s. Edmundo would have gotten something in the 30s. And then there were other political parties that would have gotten all the rest. Right? And if you look at the setup of Venezuela, Venezuela is not really a two-party system like what we have in Trinidad and Tobago, the United States, etc. And the consistent need to form coalitions would indicate that these third and fourth parties are very powerful organizations, etc. So something is wrong with that number. And then the second thing, when you look at the organization that is claiming that Edmundo won with 70%, they are called Conveni or something like that, right? Just, you know, on Wikipedia, when some words are in blue, and the ones that are in blue or some terms are in blue, you could click on it and then you could learn more about them. Yeah. Go ahead and click on that Conveni situation, and you will discover that that organization is actually, for want of a better wording, a party group for the exact political party that Edmundo ran for. No, I think he ran as an independent, but was supported by the political party that the lady who won the Nobel Peace Prize that never actually ran for a position in government, and that is a whole other conversation because there are legitimate reasons for that. And law is right here in Trinidad and Tobago, and I suspect also Dominica. So in long story short, oh, and the last thing, and I would not forgive myself if I didn't point out this, right? If you are going to say that for whatever reason that Maduro is not the legitimate president of Venezuela, let me ask a question. Who is the legitimate president of Ukraine? I'm asking you that question. Who is the
You're
legitimate
asking
who is the
me.
president of Ukraine?
I don't know who's the president of Ukraine.
Most people would tell you it's a guy named Zelensky, right?
Oh yes.
Now Zelensky, right? Now
Yeah.
Zelensky, his term in office came to an end about a year ago, something like that. Yet still he's considered the legitimate president. Why is he considered the legitimate president? Because presently Ukraine is in war. War constitutes something you call undue influence. If I'm going to vote this morning and then I hear rat-a-tat-tat-tat, AK-47s outside, I'm not going to go to vote, for there's undue influence. Therefore, any election that would happen under such a situation would be considered illegitimate. Now, let's look at Venezuela, right? Venezuela is under sanctions. Sanction in its most basic explanation could be I, the United States, or I, Trinidad and Tobago, decide I don't want to work with Dominica. That does not constitute, in my opinion, right? Just in my opinion, undue influence. Yes, it does bring potential starvation to whoever is being put under these sanctions. But that is because they went into dependency. These sanctions, however, that is happening with Venezuela actually constitute, because you have a blockade in this situation, and if you listen to Donald Trump and other persons, once the blockade may be an amplification of what has already been happening, there has always been a violent form of enforcing these sanctions, and also a violent way of forcing other nations to engage in these sanctions against their own will, right? Or to cooperate with these sanctions that are not international sanctions, that are only American sanctions against their will. That constitutes a blockade, especially as an act of war. Therefore, if in 2024, during the presidential elections, you had an act of war taking place, was that not undue influence? And if you have undue influence, who gets to be the president? Doesn't we have, you're supposed to do the same thing that you do in Ukraine and say, well, since we have undue influence that makes it inappropriate for elections, the president gets to continue. Maduro proves himself to become the legitimate and appropriate president on multiple occasions. In short, my finding, if I was the judge of the situation, I feel very confident to say Maduro is the appropriate and legitimate president of Venezuela.
No, let me ask. We have to wrap it up soon, but let me ask this question. Where is the line between cooperation and being used? The line between cooperation and being used as far as Trinidad and Tobago in this whole scenario between the US and Venezuela and China, the proxy wars?
All right. I would answer that question with an illustration. I would have given an example of Trinidad and Tobago. We are in the twilight of our petrochemical industrial years. We are one of the oldest petrochemical producing nations on earth, and we are running low on our petrochemical reserves. And that is why the last Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Stuart Young, when he was the Minister of Energy under Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, would have worked with Venezuela towards this drug and gas deal. As I mentioned, you're running the pipeline from Venezuela to Trinidad, we sell the gas, etc. That is symbiotic, right? Okay. Now, we hear Kamala Persad-Bissessar stating that the United States is the largest trade partner of Trinidad and Tobago. That is a lie. The largest trade partner of Trinidad and Tobago is CARICOM, right? If you look at the statistics, you would see that by far, Trinidad and CARICOM is the largest trade partner. We benefit from CARICOM significantly more possibly than CARICOM benefits from Trinidad and Tobago. That is possible because also you have to take into consideration Caribbean Airlines belongs mainly to Trinidad and Tobago government. So we do give also to the Caribbean, right? And so why would somebody say America is the main trading partner? We need to understand the difference between something that is being done for us and something that is being done to us. Remember, our petrochemical industry would have started whilst we were colonies. So the type of revenue, right, or taxes or however you want to put it, the segment or the fraction of the wealth that is generated from our petrochemical industry was not coming to Trinidad and Tobago during colonial times in the way it would have come had we been a fully independent nation. And it appears, based on the numbers that I'm seeing, that even after we ceased from being a colony and we became independent in 1962, we went into a state of neo-colonialism whereby the Anglo-Saxon nations of the United States, Britain, etc., would continue to be drilling out our oil and gas, and we would continue to not get our fair share. And so as a result of that, I would not consider that to be trade, but exploitation. And so the fine line for me, or the whether it's fine or broad, but the line that divides the two different categories that you're talking about for me is exemplified between our relationship with CARICOM and Venezuela, which has been positive and symbiotic, and our relationship with imperialist nations, which has resulted in a situation whereby, despite us having more than our fair share of petrochemicals and one of the oldest petrochemical industries in the world, Trinidad and Tobago continues to be poor and has never had the pleasure of calling ourselves a rich nation. And we need to fix that as soon as possible. The best way to fix that is through you and I, TY, unity with the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean.
All right. I love that. And I think that is where we should end our discussion for today. Because
thank you very much.
Because I see where unity, if we come together as one Caribbean community, as one Caribbean bloc, we have a better chance of being a bigger voice than if we keep on being separate and speaking one at each other. Richie, tell him thank you very much for sharing, because knowledge like this needs to be heard. So tell him we appreciate him and thank him very much. So that's a commenter coming in and saying that. And the reason for this live, my people, and for bringing in Mr. George, is that we wanted to broaden the horizon and broaden the prospect of people understanding what is really taking place in our island. We in our Caribbean, we are, I think, under an oppressor, and we need to understand that it's not just a form of physical slavery, but if they destroy Venezuela, who is next to get destroyed? Because Venezuela is the one who can fight for all of us, if anything. We have no army in Dominica. We have no army in Antigua. We have no army in Barbados. We have no army in none of these smaller islands. The army is in Venezuela. You take out the strongest link and the rest of the other links will fall in line. So my brothers and my sisters who listen and who pay attention to things, let us first say it. I want you to say it again in your own words, where you said that let's not jump from one situation into another without first thinking about it.
Let us understand that not every alternative is a solution. But in this particular situation, we do need to make some kind of change because we're being exploited.
So I would like to thank you, Mr. George, for coming on and for sharing your candor with my followers and my listeners. And if you are not a follower or subscriber to Carlos Media or to my page, click the link, subscribe, follow, do whatever. And you can also follow Mr. George on his page as well, so that you could get more insight into Caribbean unity, Caribbean development, and the Caribbean oneness that we need to have. CARICOM was formulated for us to have one voice and one people. Let us get back to that. Let us stop fighting amongst ourselves and let us unite as a people. The weaker we are as a people is the easier we are to be exploited. So I would like to thank you. But Leroy, stay in the background. Let me just end this live real quick. Thank you guys once again, and Have a blessed evening.
Well, this is Cardos Media, and yeah, don't blame the messenger. Yeah.